When I was arresting the prisoner, I was accidentally stabbed. The attending doctor is my ex-husband. He pressed against my wounds, his face pale, and his voice trembled. Do you regret leaving me to live like this? After a while, he said, I regret it. I shouldn't have let you go in the first place. Action. Hyman Burke gave the order, and I sprinted out of the hidden alleyway, and headed straight for the prisoner. But the other party is very cunning and very familiar with the surrounding terrain, and it doesn't take long to get rid of many of my colleagues. I'm the only one left in hot pursuit. Seeing that he was about to run out of my sight, I cursed and outflanked him from the side of me. Soon, he was stopped by me. I bent over my legs, panting from exhaustion. He's pretty good at running. I calmed my breath and approached him step by step. Grab it, August Shelley, you can't escape. I don't know where he pulled out a fruit knife, the tip of which was pointed straight at me. He broke down and yelled, Don't come here. If you dare to come here, Lao Tzu will stab you to death. As he spoke, he stepped back, looking nervous. I looked up at my watch. I've just sent the location, and it only takes 5 minutes for my colleague to arrive. August Shelley was cornered by me. All he could do was swing his knife and pounce on me for a way out. I dodged his attack, grabbed his hand and kicked him in the stomach. The knife fell to his feet, and he let out a scream. Tell you to run, tell you to run. Tired grandma's legs. I slammed him on the skull, shackled him with my backhand, and handcuffed him from behind with the other. You have the right to remain silent, but every word you say will be evidence in court. As I tortured him, August Shelley jerked free of my restraints, picked up the knife on the ground, and stabbed me in the abdomen. Caught off guard, I touched the blood on my hand. This isn't the first time I've been stabbed, but it was the one I feared the most. At that moment, a picture from a long time ago suddenly appeared in my mind. The tall man smoked a cigarette in the living room all night, and the floor was full of cigarette butts at dawn. His voice was hoarse. I will go to the United States after the divorce, but you promise me to take care of myself in the future and not risk my life. Oops, this time I was careless. But after thinking about it, fortunately he was not in the country, otherwise he would have shed tears again when he saw me injured. I covered my wound and was about to catch up, when I saw my colleague kick him over, and arrest him. Vice. Are you hurt? Hyman Burke's face changed and he walked over to me. Fedora, how are you? I put my arm around him, sweating from the pain. What are you doing in a daze? Call an ambulance. Hyman Burke shouted angrily to the side. Jaden quickly dialed, and the ambulance quickly took me to the hospital emergency room. But I didn't expect to meet acquaintances. And this person is none other than my ex-husband Werner Sissy, whom I haven't seen for a long time. He still looks as handsome in his white coat as he remembers. I used to like to come to the hospital to see him on duty. Others say that he is cold, and not easy to contact. But he's a crying bag in front of me. I don't accept his confession. He will cry when he is sad. When I get close to someone else, he will cry, when he is jealous. When I catch someone and get hurt, he will cry. He was really a nice and worthy of love. And I lost him. Thinking of this, my eyes were a little sour and I tried to blink. But this long-lost reunion did not last long before it was broken. Doctor, you must save our sub-team. Jaden held Werner Sissy's hand, a handful of snot and tears, full of genuine feelings. She's a hero who was injured to catch someone. You have to save her. Woo woo woo. TSK, I didn't know and thought I was going to hang. If it weren't for the weakness of the heart, I would have been able to give this kid 2 feet. Although August Shelley's knife looks red, the knife is not deep. I was about to say a few words, when Werner Sissy spoke. Does it hurt? Hearing this, I subconsciously turned my head to look at Werner Sissy. The lights on the ceiling made my eyes dizzy. I couldn't see the emotion in his eyes behind the lenses, and I could only feel the chill around him. It doesn't hurt. The sentence suddenly choked in his throat, and could not be spoken. The nurse chased Jaden away, and it was just me and him in the room. He pursed his lips and cut the hem of my dress, his bony hands wiping the wound with a cotton ball, ready to be stitched up. The movements were very light, as if they were afraid of hurting me. Werner Sissy. I couldn't resist calling his name. His hands proceeded in an orderly manner, as if they were unaffected. After the wound was treated, he did not leave, and looked at me deeply with his eyes. Fedora, do you regret leaving me like this? When I heard this, my heart hurt as if someone had cut me with a knife. After a long silence, his eyes turned red. Fedora, I hate you. I laughed. I'd heard it many times before. Behind every sentence is his fear and sincere love. The wound was not deep, and Werner Sissy gave me a few days of hospitalization after a simple stitch. The next day, Hyman Burke came to see me with flowers. Fedora, you think twice about doing things in the future, and rush up to fight alone. You think your life is too long. Hyman Burke was my senior at the police academy, and my dad's apprentice, and we worked together after graduation. He had a bad temper, and the police called him a mad dog in private, but I know he's just a knife-mouthed tofu heart. Senior brother, don't scold me, I'll pay attention next time. Hyman Burke looked like he couldn't handle me, sighed, and reached out and rubbed it on my head. Fedora, protect yourself. If you have another accident, my wife will not survive. I nodded. Just then, I saw Werner Sissy standing at the door of the ward. I quickly dodged Hyman Burke's touch, and I didn't know why I was a little weak. Werner Sissy was on duty during his stay in the hospital, and he came to inspect the wards every day. Hyman Burke followed my gaze, his eyes darkening. The atmosphere was quirky. Werner Sissy didn't say anything, turned and walked away. Hyman Burke looked back at me. Werner Sissy is back. I replied to him absent-mindedly, and then perfunctorily went back to the police station. I like to be cranky when I'm alone. I used to think that time could dilute everything, but now I realize that it is all useless. When I see Werner Sissy now, I'm still as excited as if we were meeting him for the first time. Werner Sissy and I met on a blind date. The first time we met, I was attracted by his good looks. In my impression, I still took the initiative to chase him, but during the relationship, it was Werner Sissy who accommodated me more. On several dates, I released his pigeons because of the arrestor, but he never complained about me. He's busier than me, but he always shows up to me when I want to see him. After less than a year of dating, we got married in a flash. At that time, we were really happy, until, Werner Sissy, you're here. The nurse interrupted my thoughts, and I looked at the door. Werner Sissy walked in with a medical record book in hand. How are you feeling? He was serious, and there was no extra emotion in his voice. My heart was bitter, and the wound that I was recovering from was faintly painful. It doesn't hurt, it's just a little itchy, I replied carefully. Werner Sissy's long, white fingers held the pen and rustled on paper. I just watched him quietly. It's been a long time. He's thinner now than before, and his jawline has become sharper and more defined. Perhaps my gaze was too straightforward. His hand paused slightly, raised his head, and met my eyes. None of us spoke, and the atmosphere was a little delicate. I cleared my throat. Werner Sissy, when did you return home? He retracted his gaze. About a week ago. I pretended to be relaxed and said, you should have told me earlier. We are still friends even though we are divorced. As soon as the words came out, I wanted to punch myself in the mouth. It's really a pot that can't be opened. I saw Werner Sissy's face darken. An undercurrent swelled in his eyes, drawing a hint of mockery. Fedora, who said we were friends? I can't be friends with you. I was stunned. I don't understand for a while. If he has no feelings for me, or if he hates me so much that he doesn't even want to be a friend. Werner Sissy checked and prepared to leave. I don't know what happened at that moment, but I suddenly got out of bed and grabbed his arm. Tearing the wound, I couldn't help but frown, and make a sound. Werner Sissy heard the voice turn around, and the next moment he said angrily, Fedora, what are you messing with? I lay back in bed. Werner Sissy lifted my hospital gown, bleeding from the bandage on my abdomen. There was panic on his face, and his voice trembled softly. If you don't work hard, you don't listen to me. Fedora, even if you want to die, please don't die in front of me, otherwise I will hate you for the rest of my life. I watched his eyes turn red, and my heart moved slightly. Werner Sissy, do you want to get back together? Werner Sissy's eyes twinkled, and he took a step back. Together. What did you take me for? A dog that comes and goes at a moment's notice. He paused, and his voice was hoarse. What about having a dog and feelings? What about you? Your heart is made of stinking stone. My breath was stagnant, and my heart was sore, and swollen like a lemon. I grabbed the hem of his sleeve and muttered, no. Werner Sissy asked the nurse to bring a tourniquet, and gauze and re-bandage me. Werner Sissy, I'm sorry I was young and ignorant, when I divorced. He took the tray and stopped. Fedora, there are many things that can't be repeated, and I never blame you, but I can't get over that hurdle. The days of recuperation were long and boring. I tried to go to Werner Sissy, but didn't dare to get closer, so I could only look at him from afar. Hyman Burke suddenly appeared behind me. Why don't you go over? I turned my head and smiled wryly. He hates me now. It's as if time has stood still. Hyman Burke stood up straight, his eyes downcast, looking at me with a voice that was unspeakably soft. Do you like it now? Without hesitation, I nodded. Yes, always have. Hyman Burke's eyelashes fluttered, and the corners of his lips lifted for a moment. If you like it, chase it. No matter what decision you make, I will support you. I breathed a sigh of relief in my heart, but my heart welled up with inexplicable guilt. The senior brother is a straight man, and everything on his face is written. For example, he likes me. For example, he is sad now, but he still pretends to be nothing. And what I can do is not to puncture this layer of window paper, and carefully guard our relationship. During her stay in the hospital, Werner Sissy came to the ward on time every morning. He still doesn't talk much, and I don't know what to say. It was as if there was a barrier between us, and we couldn't cross it no matter what. During this time, I was tempted to talk to Werner Sissy, but he always resisted. Soon came the day I was discharged from the hospital. Jaden and his brother came to pick me up. While waiting downstairs for the bus, I saw Werner Sissy walking with a long-haired intellectual woman, talking and laughing. Werner Sissy naturally took the woman's handbag, even with a smile on her face, that I rarely saw since the reunion. Watching them talk so happily that my heart instantly tingled like a pinprick, I froze in place, unable to move a step on my legs as if they had been filled with lead. The hall was full of people, but I was the only one standing in the center. Werner Sissy quickly noticed me, and his face froze for a moment, then quickly returned to normal. I lowered my head and thought about it, a lot. Thinking of the reunion proposed by himself, a few days ago, it was like a slap in the face, and it hurt hotly. How could I think Werner Sissy was still waiting for me? He is now a well-known surgeon at home and abroad, with a successful career and a proper winner in life. And I'm just a passerby in his life. I smiled self-deprecatingly and headed for the door. He hadn't gone far when he heard hurried footsteps behind him. Fedora. Werner Sissy grabbed my wrist, and I turned to look at him in a daze. I don't know how long it took, but my hands were a little tired from being clutched by him, and I struggled. He seemed to come back to his senses, and his expression let go of me a little unnaturally. You were discharged from the hospital today. I nodded. He was my attending doctor. How could he forget all the dates I was discharged? I'm a little unhappy, but I'm no longer qualified to play a tantrum with him. My gaze unconsciously fell on the woman, who was still waiting for him behind him. I pursed my lips, took a step back, and said in a detached tone, Werner Sissy is so busy, I won't bother. You go about your business. Worried that there was a jealous meaning in my words, I picked up again. Senior brother is still waiting for me outside, so I'll leave first. Werner Sissy's originally soft face suddenly turned cold, and his tone became polite. After being discharged from the hospital, you should eat a light diet and stop doing strenuous exercise. I bowed my head. Thank you, Dr. Werner Sissy, for the reminder. Seeing that he had nothing to say, I suppressed the loss in my heart and prepared to leave. Fedora, what the hell are you trying to do? Werner Sissy's tone was subdued, and his gaze fell on me, his eyes extremely complicated. I quietly clenched my fingers and asked, pretending to be calm, I don't understand what you mean. Fedora, don't you count what you've said? His voice was soft and seemed disappointed in me, but my throat was so choked that I couldn't say anything. Werner Sissy paused, his gaze grim. Fedora, I'll just ask you, is there anything you'd like to ask when you see me with other women? I was dumbfounded. All of a sudden, I realized that I had changed. If it were Fedora in the past, he would have grabbed Werner Sissy and broke the casserole until he dragged me into his arms and kissed me speechless. But now I hesitate. Vice, the car is coming. Jaden was at the hospital door, waving at me. Werner Sissy sneered at the corners of his mouth. Forget it, Fedora, let's go. I won't embarrass you. As soon as he finished speaking, I dragged him into the stairwell. The door panel was weighed down by the weight, and the air was filled with small, invisible particles that filtered in through the window. Werner Sissy was pressed against the door panel by me, looking at me with a stunned expression. The next second, I stood on my tiptoes and pressed my lips to his lips. Time seemed to stand still at this moment. Werner Sissy seemed to be under a spell and remained motionless. I began to attack, pried his lips open, and stormed the city. Seeing that he didn't react, I suddenly worried that I would be wrong. I pulled away and leaned back. That girl, it's not your girlfriend, is it? Werner Sissy chuckled. What if it was? Sure enough, it was too impulsive. All my passions died down at once. That's me taking advantage of you. Not next time. Just as I was about to walk away, Werner Sissy put his arm around my waist and lowered his head. That's what you should have asked the first time you saw us. It was so close that I was a little afraid to breathe. Is that what the hell? He leaned down. If so, will I let you kiss me? Werner Sissy rolled over and trapped me in the chest, completely dominating, like a wolf who didn't know how to eat, kissing me so that the base of my tongue was numb. I don't know how long it took, but I pushed him away so hard that my breathing was a little messy. Werner Sissy, senior brother and Jaden are still waiting for me. He frowned and bit me. I don't want to hear other men from you. My heart was sweet and I explained. They're just my colleagues. You're different. What's the difference? Oh, I'm your ex-husband. It's different. His tone was a little dull, as if he remembered an unhappy past. I hugged him tightly. Werner Sissy, give me some time, and I'll give you an explanation. Okay, he snorted, and said with some dissatisfaction, I won't forgive you so easily. I looked up and opened my eyes wide, but we kissed each other. Werner Sissy hooked her lips and smiled rather than a smile. Did I promise you to get back together? I thought about it, and I paid attention to this when I kissed my relatives in my heart, but I still shook my head honestly on the surface. And what do you want to do? If you kiss, you will be responsible. Isn't that what you said? Werner Sissy pinched my chin, and his deep eyes reflected my innocent look. Dora, let's start from scratch. Heh, then I'm not going to chase you again. You're so hard to chase. Werner Sissy couldn't help but laugh. Aren't you already experienced? If you want to reconcile, let me see your sincerity. Show. Under his semi-coercion, I agreed. Won't you just chase it again? Little Werner Sissy, I'll take care of it. When I returned to the bureau, the team gave me a week's leave to recuperate, but I was always thinking about chasing Werner Sissy, and I lay in bed, tossing and turning, and couldn't sleep. I clicked on Werner Sissy's website. Every year during the spring festival, I would say Happy New Year to him. He never replied, and his circle of friends was blank. I don't even know if he still needs this website. Without much confusion, I sent him a sentence. Did you sleep? I thought he was so busy now that he didn't reply so quickly. So I went to wash my hair, and made myself a bowl of egg noodles with tomatoes by the way. As a result, as soon as I picked up my phone, more than a dozen messages popped up. I didn't sleep. I was on duty. You speak. What about people? Ignore me for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Are you chasing people like this? Are you hanging me to play? No, you're asleep, aren't you? I hurriedly took a picture of the face for him. The one I made was delicious. If you want to eat, do you want to bring it to me? I took a bite of noodles and was a little embarrassed. But if it takes too long, the noodles will clump up, which will affect the taste. After a few seconds, he replied, it doesn't matter. Will you come? I don't know if it's a delusion on my part, but he seems to want me to go. Okay, but it'll be a little later. I'll have to make a new one, and I'll have to put on a slashing makeup. Okay, I'll wait for you. When I got to the hospital, I drove to his office. He's not here. I waited a while, and he hadn't shown up yet. I wanted to call him, only to find that I was in a hurry to go out and forgot to bring my mobile phone. I don't know how long I waited, but I wondered with some malice, did Werner Sissy regret it and deliberately embarrass me? But even so, I was reluctant to leave, in case he was really in a hurry. Before I knew it, I was asleep, and in a daze, I felt someone touching my face. I woke up with a thud. Are you awake? Werner Sissy looked at me with a smile. I took out the lunchbox and whispered, I've been waiting for you for a long time, and my face must be lumped. Otherwise, don't eat it. I'll go home and make it for you again. As I spoke, my tears fell silently. It's strange that since my dad died, I've become strong enough to keep my face from being stabbed with a knife. But in front of Werner Sissy, I couldn't help but be sensitive and soft. Werner Sissy took my hand and lifted my chin. Crying for what? Think you've been waiting a long time. Didn't I tell you that there is a temporary operation in the hospital? So don't you rush over. He still had a faint smell of disinfectant on his body, and his slender white fingers gently wiped away my tears. I cried because I forgot my phone. Werner Sissy didn't know whether to believe it or not, and suddenly called me very seriously. Fedora. I answered. His voice was like a feather running across my ear, causing a tingling. You just called me 3 times in your dream. Heh. My tears suddenly stopped. You talk nonsense. I never talk in my dreams. His eyes locked firmly on me, not allowing me to dodge. You told me not to leave you. I didn't even know that you couldn't live without me so much. My face was red and my ears were hot. Sure enough, bad habits hurt people, and they have to be changed in the future. Werner Sissy looked at me, with his arms around his chest. I bit my lip and said stiffly, you must have heard it wrong. He shrugged, didn't argue with me, took the tomato and egg noodles and ate them. I was quietly relieved in my heart. In the blazing white light, I looked at him blatantly. Werner Sissy was brilliantly educated, always chewing slowly when eating, exuding an aristocratic elegance. But I'm always quick because of my profession, and Werner Sissy doesn't say a lot about me. Until one day on duty, I suddenly fainted, went to the hospital for a checkup, found out a stomach problem, and had a small operation. That freaked out Werner Sissy, who was so angry at me that he used me like air all day, and it didn't help to make any coaxing. In the evening, after the anesthetic had passed, I woke up uncomfortably. When I turned my head, I noticed that Werner Sissy was holding my hand to his lips, but the person seemed to be asleep. His eyes were shallow and blue, and I didn't want to disturb him, so I moved my position slightly, but he woke up anyway. The wound hurts. I nodded aggrievedly. Werner Sissy, I was wrong. I'll listen to you from now on. Werner Sissy's eyes were red, and her voice was a little hoarse. Then you have to eat well, and you can't scare me anymore. I patted his hand. My husband doesn't cry. Hug. Later, my lips were a little dry, and Werner Sissy went to fetch water. The nurse came to round the ward and whispered to me, Fedora, I envy you. There are a lot of patients today, and Werner Sissy has been busy all day, and he finally has a lot of time, so he came straight to your ward. I really didn't expect that the seemingly cold and wise Werner Sissy turned out to be a love brain in private. I couldn't help but laugh out loud when I thought about it. Werner Sissy slowly pulled out a tissue and wiped his mouth, then raised his eyes. Fedora, you restrain yourself. My eyes widened, and my tone was innocent. What's wrong with me? He gritted his teeth, looking a little dissatisfied. You've always seduced me so much that I can't eat. What a cauldron, falling from the sky. I'm a little speechless. The next moment, Werner Sissy took off his glasses, put his arms around the back of my neck, and said helplessly, there's really no way to take you. Don't you just want to kiss? You need to do this. With that, my lips were hot. The ambiguous atmosphere in the office is rising, and the breath that does not belong to you is entwined with each other. Outside the window, it was raining, and the water droplets rolled, blurring the world. In the close space, I heard a heartbeat like a drum, but I couldn't tell whose it was. Later, fortunately, I came to my senses in time. Otherwise, I would never have set foot in this office again in my life. The rain was ticking, and I lay in Werner Sissy's arms, pressing his left hand lightly and heavily. Werner Sissy snorted, clasped my wrist back, and said in a somewhat unbearable tone, Fedora, you're enough. If you flirt like this again, I'm going to let you go home. I just looked at him deeply. Werner Sissy sat up uncomfortably, and her voice was soft, and a little coaxing. It doesn't hurt anymore. The teacher also said back then, I'm just mentally troubled. As he spoke, he turned his wrist as if to prove it to me. I mean really, don't blame yourself. I'm a surgeon, and I know better than anyone how important a pair of hands are. I do 60% of the surgeries in the hospital now, and I can't joke with the lives of my patients, but I kissed the hand anyway. It was because of me that I was injured, and almost ruined Werner Sissy's future. I will always remember that tumultuous night 5 years ago. My dad is the captain of the municipal criminal police team, and during his tenure, he has solved hundreds of difficult murder cases and won many honors. But as he gets older, his body is not as agile as before. His family persuaded him to take a back seat many times, but he was not happy and always felt that he could still do it. A year after I married Werner Sissy, my dad was shot while chasing a fugitive. It took Werner Sissy 3 days and 3 nights to save my dad's life from death. When I woke up, my mom hugged him and cried. Werner Sissy took me to the office and said to me with a solemn face, "Dad is over the danger period for the time being, but he still needs to be observed, and now he must recuperate." I heard a hint of uneasiness, and pondered how to get my dad to relax. However, before I could speak, my dad suddenly announced his early retirement. Although there was some surprise, I was relieved. My dad had just recovered a little when my grandmother, who lived alone in another place, suddenly fell down the stairs. My dad told my mom to go back to my grandmother while I took over the care of him. Within 2 days of taking care of my dad in the hospital, he urged me to go back to the bureau and asked me to come less in the future. Looking at my dad's white hair that popped up overnight, my eyes suddenly became sour. In just a few days, he looked a lot haggard, and his whole person lost a lot of weight. "No, I promise Mom to take care of you." My dad sat up, put his hand to his lips, and coughed heavily for a few minutes before calming down. "I'm a big man. How inconvenient it is for you to be a girl." My dad gestured to Werner Sissy to the side. "Isn't there still Werner Sissy? He's a doctor, and you can rest assured that he's there." Seeing that I was still hesitating, my dad's tone was a little tough. "Fedora, you're the best network technician in the bureau, and you still need your help to trace the fugitives. You are obedient." I was so angry that I turned around and left. Werner Sissy was about to chase me, but my dad stopped her, not knowing what they said. Werner Sissy was a little heavy when he came to me. "Fedora, you listen to Dad, he's doing it for your good." At that time, I didn't understand the meaning of his words, but complained that my father was old-fashioned, and his own daughter couldn't serve him well. In the days that followed, I was so busy locating the fugitives that I didn't have time to go home or to the hospital, so I took the time to call Werner Sissy every day to ask how my dad was doing. He said he was recovering well. I believed. When I got home, I made my father's favorite bun stuffed with shiitake mushrooms and greens and sent it to him. By then, the hospital was in chaos, and the doctors, nurses, and police were all running to my dad's room. I suddenly had a bad premonition in my heart. The lunchbox fell off my hand, the buns were scattered on the ground, and someone crushed them, and no one cared. Werner Sissy emerges from the room, a blinding red on his white coat. He looked up tiredly, and at a glance he saw me not far away, and his whole body was stiff and unspeakable, as if I had been dragged back to my senses by something. I rushed over to him, and asked, "Werner Sissy, what's going on? There's a medical disturbance in your hospital." I looked at my dad's hospital room. My legs were weak, but I still managed to go that way. Werner Sissy grabbed my wrist, and held me in his arms, his voice hoarse. "Fedora, don't go." The next second, my empty eyes froze. The senior brother came out of the ward with a man in handcuffs. That hideous face has almost been imprinted in my mind these days. I struggled violently, pushing him desperately. I don't remember how much effort it took at the time. I only remember Werner Sissy letting out a brief groan after being thrust to the ground. But I don't have time to take care of it. I walked into the room, and my dad was covered in blood-red white sheets, and the floor was covered in sticky red liquid. The thick smell of blood rushed into my nostrils, and I wanted to vomit but couldn't. When I couldn't stand on my feet, Hyman Burke grabbed me in time. I never imagined that my dad would end up with a whole corpse left behind. Hyman Burke was with me, on guard with my dad, and Werner Sissy came late. "Fedora, I'm late." He reached out to hug me, but I subconsciously avoided it. I raised my eyes and couldn't help but question him. "Didn't you tell me my dad was fine? Aren't you taking care of him? Why did anyone go into his hospital room and harm him, and no one knew?" "Werner Sissy, what were you doing?" I was so focused on myself that I didn't notice Werner Sissy's pale face and stiff arms. He looked at me with red eyes, and kept saying, Dora, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. My tears flowed uncontrollably, and my heart felt as if it was being pinched by a big hand. Actually, I was wrong. I shouldn't have left my dad alone for a few days, and I shouldn't have put the blame on Werner Sissy, who was busy saving lives every day. I knew it all in my heart, and it wasn't his fault at all. He didn't need to apologize to me, but I was emotionally controlled, and I couldn't help but say hurtful things. After my dad was buried, my mom was depressed and moved to live with my grandmother. I submitted an application for transfer to the leadership, and transferred from the technical department to the criminal investigation department. Werner Sissy seems to be a lot more idle than before. Pick me up, and drop me off every day, and when I get home, I have a delicious meal. He's trying to amuse me, but I'm running away. I'm busier than ever, chasing after me with the fugitives, leaving the man with my eyes full of me. Then Werner Sissy's mother approached me. I realized that I had ruined Werner Sissy's future that day. In addition to saying hurtful things, the last line of defense in my heart has completely collapsed. I got home early after a long absence, and Werner Sissy happily cooked a table of my favorite dishes. I wanted to cry, but I pinched my palms and held back. After eating, I looked at Werner Sissy with a blank face. I've thought about it for a long time, but I still can't face you without a heart. Every day I see you, I feel miserable. Werner Sissy's hands were shaking slightly, and my tears were falling. So Werner Sissy, let's get a divorce. He decisively refused. I don't agree. I don't get a divorce. Divorce is good for us. Don't be obsessed. Werner Sissy knelt down and confessed to me. He said he was wrong. He said he would never again be greedy for the 10-minute break at noon. He said he loved me, and didn't want to leave me. Crying, tears dripped down my hands, as if a big hole had been burned. Werner Sissy shouldn't be like that. He should smile spiritedly, stand on the operating table to save lives, and act like a big hero. I wanted to hug him, and tell him he wasn't leaving. I need him very much now, too. But what comes to mind is what Werner Sissy's mother said before leaving. With you, Werner Sissy wouldn't be going to the United States for treatment. I know that you have a deep relationship, and when he returns home, if you still love each other, I will not stop you. But for his sake now, please spare my son. The raised hand suddenly lost its strength and fell down. My heart was broken, but my voice was so cold. Werner Sissy, I'm really annoyed. I don't love you anymore, so let's not delay each other. If it had been before, Werner Sissy thought he would have been able to keep me. Then after hearing my words, his whole body was depressed. I got up and went back to my bedroom alone. Werner Sissy didn't come in all night. When dawn came, I opened the door, and the tall man had been smoking all night in the living room, and the floor was full of cigarette butts. He seemed to have resigned himself to his fate, with mockery at the corners of his mouth. The divorce property is all left to you, and this house is yours. I'm going to the U.S., and I'm probably not coming back, but you promise me to take care of myself in the future and not risk my life. I clenched my fingers and nodded. On the day Werner Sissy left, I went to the airport to smuggle him off, watch him look at the gate for a long time, then turn around and leave alone. The last light of my life was gone. Werner Sissy's eyes were red when he heard that I was going to see him off at the airport. I just said that I always felt that there was someone behind me staring at me that day, and that person turned out to be you. He pinched my chin and bit me hard. Don't you dare to mention divorce in the future? After saying so much, I was also in a much more relaxed mood, and joked with him. We haven't remarried yet, so you're thinking long term. Werner Sissy frowned. Dora, what do you mean? Isn't it a matter of time before you remarry? I think Werner Sissy has a very self-awareness when he returns to China. It seems that it is a natural thing for us to get back together and remarry. I pondered for a moment and said softly, haven't I caught you yet? In case you reject me. Werner Sissy was in a hurry. How could I refuse you? If you don't believe it, go home and get your documents. We'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau at dawn. As he spoke, he was about to take out his phone and call me a taxi. I held him down. Don't bother me by car. Werner Sissy's hands paused, put down the phone, and held my face with both hands. Remarry tomorrow. His eyes were serious, and my heart was beating faster with nervousness. Then I don't have to chase you. Werner Sissy is right. Of course you have to chase it, and remarriage won't affect you chasing me. I have mixed feelings. Why did this script suddenly go from a broken reunion to love after marriage? In the end, I couldn't beat Werner Sissy. At the end of the shift, he drove me home to get my documents, and drove directly to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Wait. Werner Sissy raised an eyebrow. Fedora, you dare to regret that I broke your leg? I got angry and said, aren't you playing with me? How can I remarry with only my own documents? I was so angry that I got out of the car and walked back. Werner Sissy chased after him, who said I didn't have papers. He dragged me for fear that I would slip away again. Opening the car door, he leaned over and took out the documents from the locker, and there was a household registration book inside. Werner Sissy was a little embarrassed, and the roots of his ears were red and dripping blood. I've been ready to remarry you since I returned home. I won't give you the slightest chance to regret it. At 9:35 a.m., Werner Sissy and I remarried. He snatched the red book from my hand, and carefully put it in his pocket. I'll keep it, I pouted unhappily. Why? That's mine. Werner Sissy took my hand tightly and held out his little finger in a serious manner. Then you hook me first, and never mention those two words again in my life. I laughed at him for being childish, but my hand had its own thoughts and hooked him uncontrollably. Stamped. At the end of the ceremony, I reached out and asked for Ben. Werner Sissy pretended to be stupid, and walked to the car with my shoulders around. What do you divide between husband and wife? Your wife. Let's go home. A year later, Werner Sissy has been looking at me, with a slanken look lately. Fedora, have you forgotten something? My heart beats the drum. My eyes widened. Husband, what's wrong with you? Who's upsetting you again? Werner Sissy hugged her chest and snorted. I suddenly remembered that you said that you chased me again, and it was just a meal and it was over. Am I so casual in your eyes? I get it. After remarrying, Werner Sissy and I lived a life of honey and oil, and we forgot about it for a long time. I didn't expect Werner Sissy to be careful until now. I kissed him on the lips. Of course I remember. I'll accompany my husband whatever he wants tonight. Okay. Werner Sissy's Adam's apple rolled for a moment. Don't seduce me with beauty. And what do you want? He thought for a moment. Fedora will watch me a full movie. I was stunned for a second. In my memory, every time I watched the movie halfway, I would leave early because of an emergency. Thinking that Werner Sissy had always had such a small wish, I couldn't help but touch his hair. Follow me. I wronged you. Which movie theater are we going to? Werner Sissy said. Just stay at home. I sighed. There is no atmosphere in the house. Werner Sissy laughed but didn't say a word. I was suddenly wary and always felt that nothing good was good. At night, Werner Sissy projected the selected movie, and I found a place in his arms. Let's get started. It was normal at first, but the scene became more and more wild later. Werner Sissy pressed me underneath me. His eyes lit up. Fedora, I'm smart to watch a movie and taste beauty. Clever, clever you big-headed ghost. The end.